Welcome to Building for Everyone and No One. I forgot to do a nice introduction slide, so hi, my name is Davila. I've been doing websites and content management systems for 2 decades. Been working with Drupal since 2011, and I've had a number of roles, mostly in higher ed. I'm an independent contractor today, working primarily right now with UCSF. This talk is really about just some of the if anything, it's almost like a philosophical musing on some of the lessons that we had, just trying to shift mindset from building individual sites to building a platform that could be reused across the organization. So where did we start? I was working with the IT Web Services team at UCSF. They're an in-house team at the university, but they mostly follow an agency model, meaning that they weren't paid to serve the needs of the entire university day to day. They were paid by individual units to come in and build websites for them most of the time. That meant that they were doing a lot of bespoke projects, a lot of one-offs, a lot of kind of custom work. Although through those projects, they were beginning to see the value in iterating towards reusability and building stuff that could be reused, building stuff that was more like a platform. And then we had a new project, which was called the Platform for Academic Websites, or PAWS. Shout out to John for naming it. You never know. This was one of the first, even though there had been some iteration towards these reusable, towards platform concepts, this is one of the first projects where the idea was to build a platform from the start. So there's a number of benefits that we sort of sold the whole concept on. One was just improving the user experience, and that really meant not just for visitors who would have a more consistent experience of the university, the more sites use the platform, but also for the content authors who had disparate versions of sites at the time, many different iterations of the back end, totally different authoring interfaces. Thought was if they could have sort of the same interface, then they could share, sort of swap notes more. People would be more able to, trade across, units and help each other out. Also, going to having a platform that you can actually serve most of the site needs with is a huge boon to your aspects of compliance. Compliance meaning things and security compliance. So kind of centralizing so you can have more control, but also give people what they need. There's a huge potential cost reduction associated with this. So this was targeted towards departments and schools that often had sort of a handful of websites themselves. We figured there was roughly 35 units that were at the size they would potentially adopt this platform, and their normal approach was to go out to an outside vendor, spend $150,000 to $500,000, and then rinse and repeat every 5 to 8 years. So as you can imagine, I'm not even going to do the math, that adds up really quickly. If you can provide more of that functionality out of the box from an internal team, then you're potentially saving a lot of money. Lastly, saving that money lets the units focus their energy and time where it actually matters. Not that the website infrastructure doesn't matter, but I think a lot of us know what a challenge it is to have good content, to develop new content, to have a content strategy, to develop your visuals. By not spending the money building the foundation over and over, these units could potentially spend more money achieving their goals. So what did we go through during the sort of building phase? For one, we knew that there was a number of trade-offs that you're constantly balancing as we made this shift. The first one is consistency versus flexibility. The organizational goals really revolve around creating a lot of consistency. Consistency in the platform you're offering, consistency in the styling and theming and the things that affect accessibility and your compliance aspects. At the same time, the end users, or the adopters of this, the comms directors and web leads, they want flexibility. They want to be able to create a site that speaks to like the unique stuff they do in their department. And all these departments are different. Even if they have similar needs for the web, they are doing different things and have different personalities, and they want to express that. The second big trade-off that we were constantly balancing was velocity versus consideration. And what I mean here really is just like, you've got a certain amount of money, you kind of have a burn rate every day that you're developing the platform, you want to move quick enough to get something built, but also you're trying to build something that is not just for that first customer, but for the 5th customer, or the 10th customer down the road, or the 35th, when you get that very last group that you've identified on the system, which means that you have to think about things and plan more than if you were just building one site. So this is also a related one, kind of the same as the previous one, but just different framing, is the trade-off between reaching that MVP, getting the stack set up, the technology set up so you can get the very first person on, versus that general platform. So not just the speed and the time that it takes to do that, but what are the actual like architectural decisions you're making, and balancing that between like the end goal and the like initial success. So we went into a discovery phase, and we had like kind of a lot of the idea of this mapped out, but we wanted to do some discovery to make sure that like we weren't making assumptions that didn't fit like what the customers wanted. We convened a customer advisory board that had representatives of a bunch of the sort of like groups that represented like who would adopt this. The number one thing we got out of that is that they wanted expressive content and design. And that's actually a term that like we kind of cooked up in the process of discovery, because the actual stakeholders would often call it, they wanted a modern design, or they wanted a dynamic design. Those were kind of the two most common things we heard, and as you can imagine, those have a lot of additional connotations that are not always either accurate to how we're approaching things, or maybe mean something specifically to web people that is not what they're saying. And eventually we landed on expressive. Like that seemed to capture what they wanted, which is, they've got a program, it has a je ne sais quoi. Like they want to do things with the design that are not just single column of text, and they want that because they want to be able to like sort of highlight in a way that shows like, here's who we are, this is what we do, here's our like main action we want you to take. So we landed on expressive for that. We also had a lot of requests around collaboration features. A lot of these units, because of the size we were targeting, have either multiple editors on a main team, or they have distributed editors across the organization, and they needed like workflow tools to deal with that. So while this is actually fairly common to implement in Drupal sites, just the biggest thing is making sure to have drafts and revision. Not just revisions, but drafts, in that you can stage a draft, preview it, maybe even have like a simple preview link you can send out, because not everyone is a Drupal user. That's been around in Drupal for a long time, but it's also something that often doesn't get implemented if people don't ask for it. And we definitely could hear that was a need here. Related to that, one of the other discovery insights was around reporting, because these are sort of people that have a communications operation that are actually also really interested in reporting and other sort of back-end tools to help manage the content. So, if you're building a system like this, sort of good things to think about is like administrative views that go beyond like the basic content menu, so that you can find things, so that you can go through and like do your work. But it also means like being able to kind of keep track of like what's the status of things, how old are pages, what pages are aging, who's the like sort of responsible parties, that kind of thing. And lastly, we just heard a lot about the need for support. So if people are going to have a system, they need to know that someone's going to be on hand to like help them with it, and that also the training is going to be there, so that it's worthwhile to adopt it. We also, as we were moving into design, we ran into some specific challenges, which in some ways was kind of the impetus for me wanting to talk about this. The biggest one was around ownership. So the team was mostly used to working on projects and sites where there was like a single owner who could sort of like thumbs up, thumbs down, green light, red light things when it came down to it. Because this was something where we were targeting to not any one specific group, didn't necessarily have that. So like I actually worked as the surrogate product owner on this, but also I was collecting that sort of vibe and input from all of the potential future adoptees, and it made it just more decentralized and a little harder to make decisions. But we learned a lot from that, and that'll kind of be where we go. Another one was just around gathering feedback in general. So like a lot of projects, you would potentially just take like wireframes or design comps, send it to somebody either in Figma or PDF in the older days, and just ask them to hit it with comments. Because you usually have like maybe one or two people that are like the main content tags. Well, we had like 18 people on this customer advisory board, so we weren't going to sift through 18 people's, PDF comments and try to like make sense of it. So we had to come up with something new, and we were a little stumped at first, but eventually what we did was create structured surveys. So we would send out wireframes or design comps, and then we would have these surveys that were basically like, and I'll just paraphrase. I should have included this, but they basically said like, what do you think is the purpose of this page? Is it achieving that? Like what other things did you expect to see on your site? Like those kind of questions, along with some like rating scales as well. So we could kind of combine the subjective feedback they gave in a broad stroke with like their rating of like how well is this doing its job. And we found that pretty effective. It's a different level of input than when you're getting specific comments on a PDF, but they did have the option if they felt like it to comment on specific things. And then lastly, thinking back to those trade-offs, like a lot of the work from there, so we get that feedback, is how do you synthesize it and consider those inputs when there isn't like one person that ultimately you want to get a thumbs up or thumb down from. And then when it comes to design, there also were some project that giving it also came out in doing sort of in prepping for this presentation. I interviewed a bunch of the team members just to get their reflections. And over it came up how big a deal component-based layouts is. We could have, almost everything in here, I think you could translate to like a different era of Drupal or website building, but the component-based layouts really opens up and helps you address that balance question between the flexibility and the consistency. Because it lets you give people flexibility in creating that expressive content while also creating a design system that is more constrained, because they're not just in there like throwing in boxes and sizing them themselves, those kind of things. It also allowed us to accelerate a little bit in the design process because we had some other parallel projects that had component designs coming in, and we ended up just sort of speed it up. So we had a different project that was using a component to get rolling. And then, eventually that's kind of the start of like actually having a design system around all that as well. Oh, that's fun. This is just like a sort of quick glance at like sort of the progression from like wireframe to design in the concept phase. Then we moved into development. So in development, there's just a few principles that give this thing the best chance for future success in terms of being a platform. One is, and these are sort of, well, I don't know if they're in any order, but one is just like keeping maintainability and the ability to expand it in the future in mind. So in talking especially with the senior developer, like, because this is in-house and it's going to be something that they want to live with, like, he's hyper aware that like every choice he makes is something that maybe he has to deal with down the road. And then to that point, you know, we wanted to do things in the most Drupal-y way possible wherever we could. So that meant like doing things a core way is preferenced over contrib, is preferenced over custom, is preferenced over hacking stuff. And hopefully nothing really has to get hacked. And then in terms of just the developer's mindset, you know, basically what he said was he's just thinking as we go through as much as possible about future proofing. And that means like avoiding lock-in, but also just keeping in mind as you evaluate stuff like, oh, you know, is this module developed? Like, can we maintain it? If it's like a little bit, you know, sporadic, is this going to be like a good way to build a system? And then, of course, all of this stuff is a moving target. So you've got only a certain budget. You've got to get to an MVP. You're making all of those balances. So under those constraints, you know, you're constantly sort of reevaluating like exactly how much you can do with all of these principles. All right. So this is kind of like approximately where the project is at time of writing. There's a little bit more that's happened, but kind of from here on out, we're like looking at like where we are, but also looking forward. And what kind of plans have been made to keep things moving. So the future, it's a big question. We don't really ever know what the future will hold, and that's especially true of projects that can, you know, take new directions or get new priorities or other things come in overnight. You just never know. But given that, what do we know? So we got some practical concerns that are like the things that are on our mind, and a lot of this was sort of also stuff that as I wrapped my involvement in the main build phase of the project, I wanted to capture and worked with everyone to like write down and think about for like sort of like these are the things to think about in the future. So one is governance and guardrails. If you're going to start to pull a lot of people onto sort of a single system in some way, you need a way to govern that, meaning like you're going to make architectural decisions, you might need some feedback or buy-in, and then you also potentially need sort of upstream governance so that like larger bodies that sort of allocate resources and those kind of things are like involved and invested and understand what you're doing. And it also means that you're going to need guardrails. Like you can't just like let people add whatever they want. Even if you're doing all of the building, like you're going to have to think about like, is this something that is optional that we can turn on and off and maybe that's fine? Or does this affect the existing functionality? And if so, like how do you kind of keep that controlled? Second area is like the service model or just thinking about platform management. So if you're going to attempt to do something where you're providing a platform kind of Drupal as a service, a code base that's used in your organization over and over, you know, you can't just build it once and then hope that's going to last you. That's exactly the same thinking that has those original customers building $500,000 sites every 5 years. You need to have some money for maintenance and support that is set and like stable, but also think about like, okay, well, what's the funding model for that? How do we pull people in? And hopefully, how do you do continuous improvement? How do you actually have some developer time to add features to keep it compelling? because otherwise you're going to have a dated platform in 5 to 8 years and have to completely redo it, versus maybe having something that just grows over time. So once you have that, you can also think about like how you're going to pull people on. So I've been paying a lot of attention to similar case studies in higher ed, especially, and nobody has a magic bullet for this. The best case scenario is that maybe you actually have like governance or some other mandate that sort of shoves everyone towards your platform. And when I say best case, that could easily be worst case, because if you're not ready for that, that's going to be a nightmare as well, and then people will be upset. So that's another one of those balancing things. Attracting people, pulling people on so that you're moving towards success, but not moving so fast that you can't accommodate everyone. Also, just around this project in particular, I think there's more work to be done in future iterations around the user experience, and especially, partially in continuing to refine the authoring experience, which I think is always a little underbaked in a lot of our projects. And honestly, to me, the content authors should be like your number one user group, because if they can't create useful and compelling content, it doesn't matter what the visitors are getting, because that's what the visitors are there for. But also want to see more visitor research. So I'm sure we've all been there, like you're often like under constraints and doing a lot of work where you're like allowing like maybe stakeholders, subject matter experts, maybe comms people that are really like working on this day to day to surrogate for your actual visitors, especially in a university where like some of your visitors are there and you have access to, and other ones are, like just more on your own imagination. Doing more actual visitor research, I think, would really shore up the user experience as a whole. And then lastly, just aligning around leadership support. So this project was a little bit grassroots. It did have a budget. It did have support to get sort of through a first phase. But in order to knock out that governance, the service model, really move into like broad platform acquisition, it needs better understanding and support from not just the leaders in IT above it, but like other leaders around campus. It's really important to have those like kind of campus advocates if you're trying to do something like this, or if you're in a different organization, just advocates from other departments that kind of have an organization-wide pull. I think the reason for that is it's really easy to sort of build to like what your customers want, and we're doing a lot of that with the customer board. But you also need people that can speak to why having something across the organization is useful for the organization as a whole. And just like departments need websites does not answer that question. All right, so in terms of like some of the outcomes that we're already like seeing or looking forward to, one is that there are times where we kind of felt like, man, we could have gone so much further with this and just built the whole thing and been there. Wouldn't that have been great? And then reality sets in a little bit. But we did massively sort of close the gaps in terms of the capabilities that are like on hand to build sites today in that group. They had a few packages already kind of geared towards certain use cases, but there's a wide swath, like those 35 units in particular, wide swath of university websites kind of not covered in their needs. Close that gap tremendously. Also, all of that thinking around like modularizing things, thinking of it as a platform, thinking of it as reusable, is going to serve really well as a springboard or foundation for like whatever the next few steps are. And that's really whether or not what was delivered here exists as the thing. There's lots of work now that can be reused in ways that can be adapted for whatever the needs are next. And then the MVP delivery is on the way. So we have first customer, the School of Pharmacy, is being developed and launching pretty shortly on this platform with other potentials in the works. So just as proof that exists, this is totally still preliminary, so don't send it to anyone I know at the School of Pharmacy. But just an example of like, that it is coming along, and sites are going to come out on this. Okay, so and then now just to wrap up, these were kind of my big takeaways. One, the components. Like, it just opens the door to balancing those factors for the expressive design versus the like control that the organization needs, in a way that is really making this feel possible, even though all the other parts of it were possible already. And then that is transitioning towards being a design system. So not only is that being used for this one, it was pulled from a different project. There's some new branding in the works that also follows this model, and the idea is for that to like kind of converge into like an actual design system that can be like re-implemented not just in Drupal, but across like anything that's being sort of built for the web or applications at the university. Another one I think that was really a cool thing to hear, especially in talking with all the team members, is just to flex your chops. One of the big differences in this project from a lot of others was people realized on the team that they actually had to be more opinionated. Like that like we had to make decisions because there wasn't a single external decision maker. And people were jazzed about that, and it also kind of like let the professionals run with their expertise. I mean, who, I don't even have to, I don't know, raise your hand if you've ever like tried to explain something that you were professionally passionate about, and they're just like, yeah, well, yeah, that's everyone in here to some degree. So, having a thing where like you're building based on your knowledge, and that they were sort of like able to be more opinionated, to sort of flex their professional muscles still, I think is really powerful, and ultimately kind of leads to better product. I mean, you can take that too far, obviously, because you have to know what you're building and who you're building for, but it really moved away from just building to, the sort of customer or whims. Another one is just reuse anything. I mean, I think there's times where it can be hard to feel like if your goal is to like build a platform that you actually just run and put everyone on it, and then people start doing things that you can't support there, well, give them the component stack. Give them break it into some GitHub libraries that can be, pick and choose like your Lego pieces. That's the whole, it's the whole one of the huge strengths of Drupal to begin with. And if you can reuse anything, that's always going to be better than just having people reinventing the wheel and spending money doing that. So think about what pieces you can spin out for projects that don't fit the mold. And then lastly, just do your best to encourage the investment in things as a program, or to think of websites as products, because it is just too easy still today for people to think I pay to build a website and then I don't think about it for a long time. And if you want to have something that's robust, that grows, that stays relevant, you have to invest more than that. All right, so I want to thank the Platform for Academic Websites team, especially everyone who did recaps with me afterwards. That's Dana Adams, Judy Daniel, Anna Kars, James Wong, and Jason James. I also want to thank John Keeley, since he roped me into this project to begin with. Yeah, so that's what I have. There's my contact info. And we have time for any questions or discussions. Yes?
So early on, you were kind of dividing different goals, and I noted you have accessibility under compliance and not under user experience or foci. And I wonder if you could speak to that, the decision to put it under compliance and the implications of thinking of it in that way.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think for a lot of us that work on the project, that's not where we would put it. Like, it is key to the user experience. There's lots of stuff that you do for accessibility that ends up making it better for everyone. The reason that it's under compliance is just because within the organization, that's where it becomes like an external lever. So we think of it that way, and probably a lot of us in this room think of it in a very multifaceted way. But when it comes to sort of selling a project to people that are not the web people, then accessibility ends up being this thing that is ultimately for them, it's about compliance. And so that's why it was listed there as sort of part of the project sell.
Quick question about what you talked about with components and using the power of that and like towards the design system, but also like that needs ownership, right? You're never one and done with that. So could you speak to like maybe how you address that in this project or anything that you learned from like recognizing the potential of that, but also recognizing, you know, the ownership piece?
Yeah, that's a great question as well. I don't have an easy answer there. So the question is, in terms of components moving towards a design system, kind of who owns it? How do you govern and control that so that it's actually like a thing that you can lean on and has that consistency that you're looking for in doing that? So at UCSF, I think the idea is kind of for brand and the sort of design group within this IT group to kind of co-own that, or at least own the intersection point.
Those folks are concerned with like how it looks, and they're, you know, when you talked about gathering kind of feedback, I'm guessing it's maybe coming from like those are the people you would look to for steer on this. Is that?
Yeah, I think where it becomes an open question,
Yeah.
which I think you're also just alluding to, it's probably an open question in a lot of places, is where does that line get drawn? Because and I'm actually working right now with the brand group there, and so like sort of it's interesting to see like their lens and their focus on that, and they define a lot of the visual brand and identity overall. Like that's definitely their responsibility, like whole stop. But even as they go through that work, there's a bunch of stuff that doesn't translate to the level of detail you need to build a website theme or a design system for websites. So at this university, it's still kind of an open question as to exactly where that line gets drawn. But I think the idea is basically for the design group to own the design system kind of under the purview in collaboration with the brand group. Because it's that design group that really knows, like, here's our component suite, here's all the things that, like, you know, the branding agency delivers to you that or doesn't deliver to you because it's like, well, we've got 5 types of bullet lists, like, you know, that's not going to be in your overarching, like, you know, brand definition. So I think that's kind of the plan and how that's going to work. I think the question that remains is then where does the feedback go, right? So in terms of like other groups consuming that, if they're not getting what they need, or they need some different pieces, or you know, they just have like questions or want to see some other directions, do they take that to brand? Do they take that to the design people? How does that get triaged? And I don't know the answer there, but I think it rests in that collaboration, I think, being robust and a two-way street. Any other questions?
Who's maintaining the site for those site under a website under that platform that you described? So who's like if there is like a security like updates like, you know, really highly, you know, like high, you know.
Yeah. So in terms of who's like maintaining the site and the platforms, security updates, that kind of thing, this is intended to be a managed platform. So that IT group that built this and is setting people up on it, they'll do all the base maintenance in terms of like Drupal updates, code updates, security updates, those kind of things. Sometimes even like the idea is that the more that we consolidate these things, they can also do things like just roll out brand updates or other things like that. Like, in terms of like content and stuff, though, that all rests on the departments still. Although they can sort of contract with the agency side of that group still to do content strategy and to help with migration and things like that.
I have a second question. So I've been talking to John too. Like our website, we don't pay like $500,000, but we pay quite substantial amount to the vendor, and we would love to go into the UCSF, but how to find the path forward to do that.
Yeah. Well, the contact for that's Dana Adams. You can tell him I sent you. In terms of the path forward, it is a little tricky just because I was kind of alluding to, like, this is at its very nascent, like, early stages of the actual rollout. So it's not necessarily like, you can't necessarily just opt in. It's going to be more complex than that. But if you are, like, ready for a new site, or it's time for a new site for you, then that's a conversation that they're going to be having with everyone. And so there's no like particular different path into this than just going to the web services group and saying, we need a website, what's our options? Although eventually the idea is that this will be the option for a lot of people. All right, any last questions? Oh, yeah.
What do you think the best path forward for finding product owners would be?
That's a good question. So that was kind of what my role on the project was envisioned as, but it was also being like an amalgam and kind of gathering point for these, customer board. I think the customer board was a really powerful thing. So I think that's one part of the model that's really good. I think what was missing, if anything was missing, was having like a group that represented some of those enterprise stakeholders that could come in and speak to not just their needs, but like why would it be valuable to have something across the board. And I think John has an idea.
Which is, I don't think that it's proper to have IT in the product manager. I think that always puts IT in a difficult position. It probably should have come out of the marketing university relations group at UCSF, that someone there was here's the design, we're protecting the university's consistency, who can speak to that more authoritatively as opposed to these sort of financial and technical questions that Eric wrestles with, which is good, but it's not really about how do we maintain UCSF's brand.
I think that also could be reflected in the idea of just having like a group that could be an owner, and is in some places, and has been on some of our other projects, but also that could be like one component of your sort of enterprise level influencers, I think as well. The value you're speaking to is the same reason that also it'd be great to have someone like that can speak to the value of consistent websites for the mission areas or something like that as well. All right. Anything else? Okay. Well, thank you all for coming. And I have...